Can everybody hear pretty good?
I've been having some issues.
Okay. What did you say, Selena? Are you good, Selena?
I said it's been coming in a little muffled. It's been coming in a little muffled for me.
Okay. Well, we'll work with you. So just we'll work with what we have. Hello out there, podcast listeners. Today we have a special episode. I know we do Survivin, the podcast, everything Corona. Coronavirus has really changed a lot for us in our economic status, educational status, the government, politics. Everything is really surrounded by Corona. And with the surrounding of Corona, COVID has brought many changes, and some of those changes really affect our education system. And so instead of us surviving Corona, we're surviving education this episode. I have a very, very esteemed group, a powerhouse group with me, and I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Mason.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sharifa Mason. I am a state of Texas master teacher, a Dallas ISD distinguished teacher, and a 2020-2021 presidential leadership scholar. And most importantly, I am the co-chair of Texas Educators for Biden. And I'm so excited to be here tonight.
Ms. Lewis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yuridiana Lewis. I am also a state of Texas master teacher at Dallas ISD. I serve on a committee for TEA, and this year I am a senior fellow with Teach Plus, and I am also serving as a captain for Educators of Biden.
Awesome. Ms. Bro.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Darlene Bro, and I'm a 20-plus year educator. Got a few years on some of y'all. And I am the director of the Research and Evaluation Institute for Harris County Department of Education. I am currently serving as the vice president and chair of the policy committee for the Ailey ISD School Board. And I, too, am a captain for the Educators for Biden.
Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Selena Reed. I am an independent consultant providing special education services and school management services, and founder of my consulting firm, CJC Educational Consultant Services, LLC. And I am the Biden for Educators Houston Region Pearland captain.
Awesome. Mr. Phillips.
Hi, I'm Aaron Phillips. I'm a third grade elementary school teacher in Amarillo ISD, and I'm also the local president of TSTA affiliate here, as well as the junior NEA board of directors member from Texas, and I'm the Panhandle region captain for Texas Educators for Biden.
Awesome. Councilman. There you go.
Good evening. My name is Casey Thomas. I'm on the City Council in Dallas, Texas, former Mayor Pro Tem, and a former 15-year classroom teacher myself. I'm excited to be here. I chair the Workforce Education Equity Committee for the City of Dallas, and I'm also a captain. I'm a captain for the Black Male Educators for Biden for Texas.
Awesome. And last but not least.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Kimberly McLeod, and I am a dean for the College of Education and Human Services at Texas A&M University in Commerce. I am a lifetime educator. I'm up there with Darlene in those 20 plus years. Spent my time as a school teacher, school counselor, administrator before transitioning into higher ed, and have worked with Texas Southern University and HBCU, and now Texas A&M University Commerce. and a captain for Educators for Biden, representing higher education and Black educators.
Awesome. As we're going to get started, the premise of this episode is to really talk and really dive into and talk about the education system in its current state. We want to start with you, Dr. McLeod.
So good evening. Again, I'm Kimberly McLeod, and as we talk about education and a platform and how we come together to unite as educators across the state of Texas, exercising our political right and our right to give our voice and our vote. Part of why this is important for educators, communities, parents, teachers across the state is because, you know, I used to say to my group that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And our community has been on the menu for far too long. And it's time for us to take an active seat at the table and define for our community what it is that we need, how we need it, how we would like to execute it, and the funding dollars that should be attached to it. In doing that, I'm proud to say that soon-to-be Dr. Aisha Davis asked me to join and support her in creating a political voice for educators across the state of Texas. And I was glad to help her. Serving as the past president of the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators, which is a network of at least around 1,000 educators around the state of Texas that advocate for children of African descent, really for any child. But for the most marginalized child, we feel that the African American child needs that voice and that support. Last year, or 2 years ago, in one of our state conferences, we partnered and collaborated with the Texas Association of Black Personnel in Higher Education. And part of that is, how do we create pipelines of success from cradle to college and not and disrupt the school to prison pipeline. It may start in K-12, but it continues in K-16. So how we bring those two communities together. I'm saying all of that to say, when we talk about trying to exercise our political voice, our political right, it's too hard to do that alone with one voice. And that is the power of a network. That is the power of working with people across the table. It doesn't matter if it's an urban or rural community, how much melanin you do or do not have in your skin. When we talk about advocacy for children, we're talking about all children who need help, who need that voice. Correct. A rising tide lifts all ships. If we can lift those that are at the very bottom, everyone benefits from that. And I'm proud to join this coalition of trying to create that voice of advocacy for students as a captain with Educators for Biden for Higher Ed, and working with multiple groups. Those that are part of the TAFE group, the TAPSI group, but part of building that network is also working with those that are a part of the Latino group. So we built coalitions and collaborations with the Texas Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents, with the Mexican American School Board Association, with the Texas Black Caucus School Board Association. Everyone that has a voice has the opportunity to exercise that vote in a way that empowers their community, that gets them off the table, but sitting at a place where they can create the policy that will propel their communities for greatness.
That's amazing. And I think it's really important too, because myself as a non-educator, I am an advocate for students, because, you know, the public school system is starting to, I think the world is starting to turn their back on public education, and this school choice that's coming out in that rhetoric is really, really damaging, because me as a person of the public education system, I think it really, really helped me and developed me. And I think us as non-educators, we should always support this particular employment, because, you know, sometimes the school teacher is set to do everything, parent, motivate, encourage as well. And then it's also the double-edged sword. There's a repercussion to it. And so being that you guys are the political face of what we call the pandemic, you know, onboarding you guys back to school, making sure you guys are properly cared for. No one's really looking out or advocating for you guys as educators, as well as the students. So I think it's very important that this group is put together, the way it's coming together, how organic it is. And it's not a matter of color, like you said, it's just across the lines. We're just 4 people. And so I think it's very important. And if you guys want to talk about how this strategy is coming about and how you guys plan to empower more people in the state of Texas to get behind Biden so we can save the education system.
I think the first thing that we need to talk about is the creation of the affinity groups. When Aisha Davis was tapped by the Biden campaign before it was Biden-Harris, it was because of her work with the Kamala Harris campaign and in her presidential run. So she had done such amazing work that when Kamala Harris had to bow out, the Biden campaign picked her up. She's so exceptionally intelligent. She knew that this was going to need to be a production where you galvanize and mobilize all different people in order to make this effort truly successful. She reached out to me to start to look for teachers who would allow themselves to be empowered through this work. She reached out to people like Councilman Thomas and Dr. McLeod so that we could really enhance this network and not just look at it from a large group, but to be able to give individual specific groups their due and their light and their shine and allow them to create the pathway that will allow Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris to be able to really listen to the voices of the educators. And so I would really love to hear from Casey Thomas to talk about his work and how he created his group with male educators.
Thank you, Sharifa. You're doing an excellent job, and you've done an excellent job as a co-chair. I've heard great things about you from one of my colleagues, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Adam Magoo, about how great of a teacher and educator you were, and now I see why he feels that way. Having been a classroom teacher, one of the things that oftentimes Black male teachers, in their perspective, is not heard. Their voice is not heard. And so when soon-to-be Dr. Davis approached me about being a captain, what immediately came to my mind was so many Black men who have committed themselves to be examples to young Black boys in the classroom setting. And I reached out to several of my friends who have been teachers or teachers, told them about this opportunity, and they were excited. Our first first meeting, of course, everybody's on Zoom or some form of a video conference. We had 12 brothers that were excited about being a part of it. We bonded immediately, and we began developing actual policy ideas and recommendations that we're hoping can be included in the Texas Educators for Biden policy proposal that will be submitted to soon to be hopefully President Joe Biden. One of the main things that these men immediately came to agreement on is the fact that there needs to be a way that we can offer incentive for Black men to stay in the classroom. Many of them become administrators simply because of the cap or the ceiling on pay. If we were able to pay so many of our great male educators, many of them would prefer to stay in the classroom where they can have the greatest impact. We also talked about a path to administration, creating a way for Black male educators who want to go into administration, be it principal, assistant principal, all the way up to superintendent, assistant superintendent, creating a path through financial incentives for Black males to move up the ladder. Another is incentives through colleges as they offer scholarships specifically for Black males who are interested in becoming educators. Many times these things are not even thought of, but oftentimes these Black male educators have these ideas, but don't get a chance to share them. And so we've been able to come up with several innovative ideas that we feel will benefit Black male educators and future Black male educators all over the country.
I think that's great. I think that's very great. Sharifa, I can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, yes, I think that's great. And what you guys are doing. And for that Infinity group, are there other Infinity groups that are in the works outside of Black male educators providing?
Well, what we have going on, Yuri and I have been in talks about focusing on Latina educators. To Dr. McLeod's point earlier, we want to make sure that everybody is represented. We know that we have a lot of work to do in regards to the overwhelming academic gap for Black students, but we also know that everyone is in the classroom. And what you have here is a picture of the cultural mosaic that Aisha and I purposely put together. You see everyone represented on this call because everybody represents someone, teacher or student across the state of Texas. And so we strategically worked on making sure that we created a group that was extremely diverse, but we created that diversity to ensure that every group was able to get their voice heard. And to Casey's point, the purpose of the affinity groups was to ensure that the voices were heard of the most marginalized groups. When you talk about the Black male educators and you talk about the fact that they are 2% of teachers across the country, it is important to create affinity groups that allow them to amplify their voices. It's important that we start to create policy that will allow them to be a part of the solution, incentivizing them, monetizing things that will allow them to be successful, making sure that they are able to leave college, come into the classrooms debt-free. We want to be able to provide pathways for them. We want to be able to have people like the Honorable Dr. McLeod create pathways to administration, to higher learning. We have a lot of policy recommendations that are just like Casey said, innovative. They are absolutely amazing. We've covered everything from special ed teachers to reentry into schools and beyond. We want to diversify this teacher pipeline. Yuri and I have done extensive work with Teach Plus, and we know that the pipeline is 80% white. And we know that we need to ensure that there are more teachers of color. All of the data points to students, all students learning best from teachers of color. And there is even data that shows explicitly Black teachers have a great relationship with their students no matter what the race. So as a concerted group, a diverse group, we have looked all around to pick out the best and brightest to make sure that every voice is heard. And I want to acknowledge Aaron Phillips because we searched high and low for someone to represent the Panhandle. And Aaron came aboard. He came very highly recommended, but he came aboard and he really hit the ground running in an area that is marginalized. A lot of times we think Black and brown, and that's the only time we think of marginalization or disenfranchisement. But it just depends. If you're in a rural area and you're white and you're impoverished, you can be just as marginalized and disenfranchised as the Black and brown students. So I would love to give Aaron the opportunity to talk about the work that he's doing, the amazing work that he's doing in the Panhandle as the captain of the Panhandle for the Texas Educators for Biden.
I appreciate that, Sharifa. It's, it is definitely a challenge. Somebody with more progressive values living in a very deeply conservative area. But I think when you break it down into human need and human issues, that transcends party lines and folks can see where there's issues. Within Amarillo ISD, its makeup is actually very urban. It's one of the 50 largest districts in Texas. We don't have a majority ethnic population. We have a plurality of Hispanic students. White students are 35% of the district. And then we're surrounded by very rural and very oftentimes poor school districts around us. So funding is a constant issue, a scare for districts across the Panhandle. The rural districts, in terms of not having the property values to hold up the programs they want to have to serve their students, and the same within the city. And there's a lot of common ground there that I think unites folks to understand that we need better school policy surrounding funding and programs to support students in this area that oftentimes does actually align with people across the state.
Awesome. And so I know you guys are discussing about you guys are writing policy to be implemented, hopefully under Biden. Can we talk about what current policies that exist that are plaguing you guys today?
Oh, we could talk about that forever. Betsy DeVos has just done, a disservice to students across the country, especially those students who are public school students. And so some of the things that she's done recently we need to address is just the reentry of school, of opening the schools, how quickly we were doing that. The fact that she did not have teachers at the table to help with facilitating and guiding what that looked like. We also can talk about the fact that she wanted to slash the educational budget by $6 billion in 2021. All of this coming on the heels of 2 pandemics, dealing with the coronavirus and, of course, racial unrest. She also wanted to make sure that we stop being incentivized through the public's forgiveness service loan, because she doesn't think that it is okay for one job to be incentivized over the other, when everyone knows at this point in the country how difficult our jobs are and the work that we do. And the coronavirus has uncovered not only how difficult and important our jobs are, but also the tremendous disparities. And the most egregious that we all agree on is the fact that of the $2 trillion CARES Act bill for coronavirus, she stole $180 million to funnel to private schools and allow the charter schools to maintain their aid, all under the guise of the fact that those are schools as well. But private schools are built to have a different funding source than public schools. So now you have students at public schools and rural schools, to Aaron's point, that are really trying to grapple with a much smaller budget during a time of crises. And so it is important that we start to really analyze and dig into these policies that Betty DeVos has implemented and look at how they have impacted students across the country. I would love for Selena to go into what work she's doing in the Pearland area. I think Selena may be frozen, so we are going to go to Darlene, and she can talk about the greater Houston area.
Yes, good evening. Good evening. Yes, I'm excited about the work that my team is doing in the greater Houston area. I too, much like Aisha and Sharifa, was able to gather up a very diverse group. I think it's incredibly important that we have multiple voices at the table, but voices that represent certain communities. And again, on my team, I have classroom teachers, I have directors, school directors, I have everyone from, oh my goodness. Sorry. Just a variety of individuals on my team who's worked diligently with providing me with as much information about what's going on in the classroom, hands-on. And we have worked diligently with creating, looking at priorities that we feel are incredibly important for the next Secretary of Education. And some of those priorities are, of course, equitable access for students to a high quality education, which again, Sharifa mentioned that the current Secretary of Education has really put a strangling hold on that situation as far as the funding that our public schools are not getting, don't have access to, and how that funding is funneled elsewhere. We're looking at equitable access to the devices and internet connectivity during this time. Having the funding to be able to provide that for all of our students in a timely manner is incredibly important. Also, just access to for our teachers. I think it was Sharifa mentioned before about the loan forgiveness. You know, being able to incentivize our teachers to go back to school and to be able to afford to go back to school. And then many of them state that they want to work in these high needs areas. But, you know, unfortunately, being able to afford to go back to school and get their certification has proven to be difficult. So we wanted to support the Higher Education Act reauthorization to help that funding to go to teachers who choose to work in these high need schools. So that's a little bit about what my team is doing. We're in the process of actually really focusing on voter registration. Myself personally, I have, you know, college students, and right now during the pandemic, people forget that these college students are displaced as well. Many of them are starting the fall semester virtually. Well, even in my personal family, my son last voted when he went to, you know, he was a student at UTSA. So he's now here in Houston. He's out of the county in San Antonio, so he can't vote in Houston. Many of our college students don't realize that if they're not in the county that they're registered to vote, they have to re-register. So we want to educate our voters. We want to register voters, but we also want educated voters so that they know what they're doing when they go to those polls.
I think that is very important to really state that and send that home, a resounding message, because our youth, young students, they are really, really integral in this voting process, especially in November of 2020. And it needs to be known and needs to resound that if you're not in your county, you have to re-register. And I really appreciate that, Mrs. Bro, because most people don't know that. And we are counting down the days. So it's very important that you guys recognize if you are at school virtually and you're not near your county, you need to re-register where you are so you can be counted and you can actually go to the poll and vote. Doing early registration, do early voting. I mean, October 13th through the 30th. So
absolutely. And now is the time to register. Now is the time to do that work. Print out that voter registration card and go take it and turn it in. You know, don't trust the mail. Go take it and turn it in so that you know. And there's websites you can search up. Am I registered to vote? Websites come up. You can check to make sure that you are registered and where you're registered. That's critically important as well.
Awesome.
That is super important. Very important. It was a conversation that was bred out of our meeting. Darlene and Selena and I had a meeting, and just in small talk, we started discussing that because they both have college students at home. that are displaced, and not understanding where their students needed to vote was going to be an issue in figuring that out and how we could reach the masses with that information. So that is something that we are working on now. So that will be an exclusive from the Texas Educators for Biden-Harris. We're going to provide that information so that college students and parents of college students are well aware of what they need to do to ensure that their students are registered. Because like you said, Corey, we need those college students' votes, and we cannot sit on our hands. I loved what Dr. McLeod said. That quote was so powerful. If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And from that, I just created get off the table and take your seat. And so that is the type of work that we are doing with Texas Educators for Biden. We are getting off the table and we are taking our seat. We are going to amplify our voices as educators. Selena has been reaching out to retired educators. So our grasp is large. We have made this a very expansive unit, and we are not stopping until we turn Texas blue. That is our absolute goal at the end. So I'm going to let Selena talk about what she is doing in the Pearland area.
Did you defer to me?
I sure did.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things is considering that we have a lot of retired teachers. We initially had not thought about or expanded our process to include those retired teachers, and we have a lot of retired teachers that are looking forward to working with students. This has impacted them, but many of them still work in the schools as volunteers, substitute teachers, in any capacity, in tutoring, in any capacity that they can, to support positive outcomes for students. So most certainly, I have been working with my mother and other family members and friends of their friends and their friends and their friends to extend that invitation and that outreach, one, to make sure that everyone understands and knows that, we have always trusted the mail system, but there's a lot of things going on. And so if you don't feel comfortable with it and you're not sure, we are passing that information along and meeting and talking to that network. My network extends beyond novice teachers and veteran teachers, and I'm one of those veteran educators as well. So I'm up to 30 and didn't realize it, but I had to count in July. So to God be the glory on that. However, join us in the outreach of reaching out to neighbors and friends that even outside of the education industry, and get the word out that we are here to support one another to get those ballots in.
I think that's great. I think that's great. That's very important. And once an educator is always an educator. So it's really good that you guys are doing that in the Pearland, Houston area. Want to bring Yuri in, and you want to talk about your initiatives and what you're doing in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, kind of hitting on what Sharifa brought up earlier about, what we're focused on policy. And I just instantly thought the first thing in my head was that just goes to show that teachers aren't being respected as professionals. The fact that we're just being thrown into the classroom, and don't get me wrong, if you talk to any teacher, we tell you we are ready to get in that classroom. We want to see our students. We miss our students. We want to get rolling, but we also want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that protects our students, our teachers, and their families. And that's something that Betsy just is not thinking about. And one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that we have the opportunity to really hear teacher voices. So when I was reached out to by Sharifa to be a captain, I instantly jumped on it because that's allowing myself and my colleagues to have a voice in what is coming to us. So one of the things that was commonly talked about was the professionalization of teachers. our profession is not seen as a profession. And the fact that we have money being taken away from schools, I personally have taught. My last 3 campuses have been improvement required schools. These are schools that are below the state level, and we receive extra funding to bring in teachers to push that excellence on the students, to give them all the resources that we can, to have teachers that are highly qualified to be able to support those students socially and academically. And we are there for it. And so if this funding is being taken away from us, that's limiting us to have those extra resources, the extra time to be able to put into our kids. So those were some of the common threads that from our group, what we discussed. And it was great having teachers from 20 years experience, administrators, and as Sharifa said, like every color you can think of in our group.
So when you guys talk about strategizing and coming together, like what can we as a non-educator as myself, or maybe possibly a parent or anyone, what can they actually do to join you guys and get the word out and, that you guys are here and the support you need?
I'm so glad you asked that, Corey, because even though we are a huge group, we are starting school, we are going into the classrooms, we are teaching virtually. For someone like me who's technologically challenged, this has been a very cumbersome time. Even though I am excited about seeing my students again, this is stretching me literally as a professional. And I know it's going to be all good in the end. Growing and learning is something that we teach our students to do. So I'm ready to embrace it as well. But we have a lot on our plate as educators. And so we want to be able to reach out to the community. Some things that you all can be doing as educators, whether you're in the classroom currently or former educators, whether you're parents or just community members who are wanting to participate. Start an email chain with your families and with your family and friends, letting them know about the policies that Betsy DeVos has implemented that has hurt students across the country. I think it's super important to always lead with data and information. You can always Google search, but we do have a link provided to a very well-versed article that gives you a timeline of the last few years of her being in office and all of these horrific policies and how they've impacted the most marginalized, most underprivileged communities, which we all agree is extremely unfair and has really been torturous to all of us that work in these communities. The next thing that we're asking people to do is have a virtual conversation, get on Zoom, get on Google Meet, talk about the changes that you want to see in education. Don't think that policy recommendations only come from educators. The community, the parents, they have a strong voice, and we want to empower them to utilize that voice because sometimes their voice is even louder than the educators. And a lot of times they do not realize that. So we want people to get on Zoom, have a conversation with people that you can talk to, that you respect. All of the conversations are not always going to be with like-minded individuals, but the purpose of this group is to make sure that we're trying to reach everybody. To Aaron's point earlier, these policies that Betsy DeVos has implemented, they transcend race. They transcend Democratic or Republican. They transcend communities, economic, socioeconomic statuses. So it's time for us to come together and recognize that we have someone in our camp that is infiltrating it. She has infiltrated our educational camp. She has taken away from countless groups of students. And as a group, we are extremely tired of it. And we want to make sure that we do all that we can to remove her from that position. Another child cannot take 4 additional years of Betsy DeVos at the helm of the most important educational entity in the entire world. We're supposed to be the greatest nation in the world, which would mean that we are supposed to be building and developing and cultivating an educational system that matches what we do economically. And when we're talking about going back into schools unsafely, when we're talking about taking money away from marginalized groups, when we're talking about not protecting teachers and not protecting students, then we are talking about somebody who is supposed to be an American, who has come in and started to utilize us as pawns. And we refuse to do that. We're not going to lie down. We're going to continue this effort for the next 2 months. We are empowered, we are reloaded, and we are excited to get this work done. And we just ask that we have the community to support us in any way that you can. Another thing that I want to talk about, to Darlene's point, is that we want to make sure that we don't just register high school students, but we create information that allows them not to be intimidated by the voting process and to go and vote with ease. Selena and Darlene and I talked about this for nearly 3 hours on the phone one evening. We register our students by law. We have to. That's a part of the Texas law. However, the students don't know where it is that they're supposed to go to vote in their communities, and they don't know the process. Imagine being a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old walking into a huge auditorium and seeing booths that you've never learned how to activate, machines that you've never touched before. The mechanisms of voting could be very overwhelming to a young teenager. And so we want to make sure that community members are using their power to make sure that the young adults in their circles understand how to vote. I think that we've overemphasized the importance of voting, but if we don't marry that with how to vote, then we are going to see teenagers who we need very, very desperately not turning out in the numbers that they possibly could because they are not familiar with the process. And lastly, I want to talk about what we said earlier. Once again, it's extremely important. And again, Texas Educators for Biden has jumped on this before any other chapter or group across the country. We are in the works right now of creating an informational for displaced college students. We want to make sure that that information is out. We know how integral these students are in ensuring as young adults that they vote and that they are informed about where this should be taking place. We cannot leave any votes on the table. We just cannot. And we refuse to as a group. We've worked extremely hard together and individually with our specific teams to ensure that we are getting out all of the most creative ideas to embrace all of the voters across the country. This is a time wherein you have staunch Republicans saying that they are going to vote the Democratic ticket because they are teachers and they are tired of being abused. And when you have people that have committed themselves to a party and an ideology, and they themselves are saying that they are going to change because they are tired of the treatment, then you know that this is a historic time that's taking place, and we need to make sure that we have all hands on deck.
Corey, if you wouldn't mind, I wanted to follow up on something that Sharifa said.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Okay, she mentioned, yes, that we talked in depth about, making sure that our students are not just registered, but they're knowledgeable about voting. But also it's important for us to share with our students, but also our community about undervoting. So many will go in and they will just vote. Okay, well, I'm just going to vote for the president and vice president. But there's 3 branches of government. So we may need to make sure that we're putting we're not only voting for the president, but we're also putting people in those seats that will carry those legislations and those bills that are representative of what we think. The president can't sign anything if the bill never gets to him. So that's incredibly important. And also, about the judicial, we are educators for Biden, but we also have to think locally. We have to make sure that we're shoring up our local offices to make sure that they're representing us. We have to vote for those judges. We have to know who we're putting in those seats, because all too often, many of the kids that look like us are in front of those judges. So you want those judges to have a heart for the community and for our students. So we must make sure that we're not just registering these people to vote, but educating them on how to vote. One of the things that I did personally for my family and my friends, and I said, share it, is I put together a little text about, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you find out who's on your ballot. Go to the League of Women Voters, put in your zip code. It will give you a sample ballot of exactly who you're going to get to vote for. And then you get to compare and contrast and say, who is it that most represents my values? And so that way that's one of the only papers that you can carry into that ballot. And people don't realize that. You can actually print out your sample ballot, mark who you want, and actually bring it in with you to your voter booth. So though we're educators for Biden, we also need to make sure that we're shoring up all of those other offices and positions that will make sure that in the end, he will be successful.
And as you can see, Corey, with all of this knowledge, we are doing some amazing work. Yes. And I would love to bring in the person who made this responsible, who is the cultivator of bringing this group together, the Honorable Aisha Davis from the State Board of Education, who is my co-chair for the Texas Educators for Biden.
I'm really appreciative to be on tonight. And Sharifa, you've done an amazing job putting this together and working with everyone. I've been listening as I was in class, and I'm like, this is a great discussion. So just thank you guys so much for having me and for being a part of Educators for Biden. The one thing that I want to do more than anything else is get Betsy DeVos out of that secretary seat. She is bad for children. And more than anything, since I've been on the state board, I really see how the effects of her decisions truly do kind of guide some of those downhill patterns that we've seen, especially with schools in Black and brown communities. We've seen charter schools blossom all around, taking funding away from ISDs. We've seen protections taken away from kids of color. And on the higher ed side, we've seen a lot of protections taken away from students who are on those campuses. So when I say we have to get rid of Betsy DeVos, we have to do this for our children. And that's one of the reasons why we do have so many folks who are typically Republican, typically conservative, who are now considering that vote for Biden. Because no matter what they politically believe, there is that love for children. And so that's what we're doing here. We're making sure that we're putting children first in all of our policy decisions, in our discussions, and making sure we move forward with something that's positive. And one thing I do respect the most about the Biden campaign, when they said they're going to depend on educators to let them know what's truly happening in schools, they really meant that. And it's been days when Sharifa and I got to chat with some of the folks from the Biden campaign about some of those realistic things that are happening in schools. And Vice President Biden actually used some of those talking points and looked deeper into those. So he is truly listening to educators. And that's something I really value. When it comes to ed policy, you see everybody else but educators with a seat at that table. So this is reversing it and making sure children are first, and that educators are really respected for the profession that they've been certified to be in, been to college for, and they're prepared for. So, as soon as I had that thought about let's get Educators for Biden together, the next was I need somebody really strong to do this with me. And Sharifa popped up in my head immediately. She has such a strong reach, and she does amazing things on the State Board for Educator Certification. And then to have all of these educators from all around. Now, Darlene talked about how important it was to elect judges and other folks, but it's so important to elect trustees like her. So you have somebody on the board that's knowledgeable about education, that will fight for students, and that knows policy, because knowing education and knowing ed policy are two totally different realms. So making sure that you have trustees that are sensitive and aware and knowledgeable is so important. So as we change this, as we change the scope of what education looks like, And as we make sure more educators are in those seats and at those tables, we have that golden opportunity by electing Vice President Biden. And I cannot emphasize how much I love Senator Harris. I originally was on board with her campaign. So now that she has teamed up with Vice President Biden, we have two dynamic folks who are willing to listen to the people to build something better. So you guys have been doing a phenomenal job in your conversation. Again, thank you so much. I'll be sticking around, but I'll be quiet. But if you have any questions that you would like for me to answer, please let me know, and I'll just be listening from the background.
I just wanted to say really quickly, Aisha, if you would just go in depth a little bit about the work that you've done on SBOE in regards to the African American history course and it being implemented across the state, because I think that the more we have people talking about the ethnic studies courses and their implementation, the more we can start seeing changes across the country when we're talking about these pandemics that we've been dealing with, health and race. So I would love if you would just for a second speak to the work that you've done regarding the African American history course.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I wasn't the first one to try this effort. It's been decades of trying to get Black studies into Texas courses. That has been an effort by the NAACP, by different groups. But you got to know the policy and you got to know all the ways around it. And you have to make sure that the policy is actually geared towards those students like it's supposed to be. And so what I did was I found that when folks advocated to the legislature, that wasn't successful. When they advocated to the Texas Education Agency, that wasn't successful. But it was an avenue through the State Board of Education that was traveled to approve Mexican American studies. So by looking at everything that was done there, I saw that pattern, I found the policies, and I wanted to do the same for African American studies. There's a dynamic group, the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators, that I belong to, and they were such an amazing resource. They connected me to all kinds of folks, from professors to community leaders, and we were able to have roundtables in Dallas and Austin and Houston and San Antonio to talk about what does African American studies need to look like. Not the same thing we've always learned, not the same handful of historical figures, but what are some of these hidden stories that we don't know about? Who are some of these hidden figures that students need to discover? And so we dug deep for that course, and we found things that are not in any history courses today. I love the story of the Sugar Land 95, and I'm so glad that we got to include that topic in our course. That's something very unique. But it's how convict leasing was actually the extension of enslavement here in Texas. And that's something that's been coming up lately with the discovery of those bodies in Fort Bend ISD. So we have some stuff it's evolving as students are learning it, and it's expanding their mind on African American studies. At this point, I need our school districts to be advocates. I need every school district to make sure that they're actually offering it to their students. So it's there, the TEKs are there, the course is developed. We just need districts to make sure that it's part of your course catalog so students actually have that option. And we're able to work on a little federal legislation to support that as well. Congresswoman Marsha Fudge reached out after we passed African American Studies here in Texas, and she wanted to do something on a national basis. So she rolled out the Black History is American History Act in May. And what that will do is make sure that Black history is infused in every single course that involves history. And that goes from elementary to high school. It also gives some money to the Smithsonian Museum so that they can give resources to states who want to build the programs. And it holds states accountable by including some questions about Black studies in the NAEP exams. So any states moving forward, we have a blueprint here in Texas, and I would love to share with any state that's interested in building the same there. We also need to advocate to make sure that Congress passes the Black History is American History Act, and they put adequate funding so that every state around can get those resources, whether it's from the museum or from different universities like we did, however they would need it. We want ethnic studies to be valuable and important and a priority to every single state across the country. So Texas is the first one. We got Mexican American studies. We have African American studies. We're moving forward with Native American studies. And I just want other states to do the same, because that's the way you start building true history courses.
That was amazing. And I've heard this story before. And every time I listen to it, I hear something different that makes it even more inspiring and empowering. And I just wanted her to share that, because this group is all about knocking down barriers. That was Aisha's goal from the very beginning. She could have easily selected someone else to co-chair with her, someone who had a greater title, someone who is from the state of Texas. But she picked someone that she thought would be able to really diversify this group. And when you look at this cultural mosaic that I alluded to earlier, and this is just a small fraction of us, it lets you know that pain is bringing people together.
Well, I gotta wait. I gotta correct one thing you said. I didn't choose someone who I thought can do this. I chose someone who I knew could do it, and that's why you are the perfect person. So I gotta correct you on that one.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much. I'm just so humbled to be amongst this group of people, from Erin to Selena to Darlene to Yuri to Aisha, Casey, and Dr. McLeod. When you look at the different backgrounds, and I tell people all of the time that our experiences are not monolithic. And so you may think because we look alike by skin color that we've traveled the same paths, and we haven't. And Aisha taking on this idea from the beginning and reaching out and being able to bring all of us together has allowed all of us to grow exponentially. We can get on the phone when she's not even around and just start throwing out ideas. This is a very powerful group of people who don't mind giving up their time to come on a podcast, to have a meeting when they're trying to figure out if they're going to wear scrubs the next day to work, if they're going to have their temperature taken, trying to figure out the self-questionnaire that they're going to have to fill out before they leave their homes, if they're going to bring their children into the office with them while they teach from the classroom. So I know in my heart that we have done an amazing job in such a short amount of time. And to Aisha's point, many of the things that we have suggested as Texas Educators for Biden have been utilized on a national level. So we know that they are listening. We know that we are doing the work because our voices are being heard, our ideas are being utilized, and we are not going to stop. We have 2 months left. We're going to continue to galvanize. We're going to continue to mobilize across this state, and we are going to do the work.
So how does one join your movement? Like what do they need to do? Who they contact?
So I have provided a list of email addresses for almost everyone on the panel. They can reach out to us. Again, remember that I gave the list of things that people can do on their own throughout the community. They can start an email chain with their friends, because there are a lot of texts that are going around from different groups. And so we don't want the information to get lost in translation. Start an email chain with the people that you know. Start talking about the egregious policies that Betsy DeVos has implemented. Start informing people, because if they don't know, they can't grow. And that is what's happening a lot of times, is that people just don't know. They hear the name, they see a face, but they really don't know all of the policies that she has enacted that have hurt Black and brown students, that have hurt impoverished students of all colors, that have hurt rural students. Continuously, to Aisha's point, placing failing charter schools in the communities where Black and brown students are mostly serviced, and hiding the failures so that she can continue to pump funding into them while they are completely doing a disservice to our children. That is unacceptable. We're not allowing that anymore. We are not sitting on our hands. We're getting up, we're amplifying our voices. To talk about what Selena said earlier, reach out to your retired educators in your community. They are a valued resource. We need to know what it is that they think needs to be happening also, so that we can push their agenda as well. This movement is Texas Educators for Biden, but we need parents. We need community members. We need everybody, because she is not hurting just educators. She's not hurting just students. She's hurting parents. She's hurting our economy. If our students do not leave our schools college and career ready, they cannot work in this global economy. We cannot continue to allow her to have that type of power. That is extremely dangerous. And we need to make sure that we sit down and we talk about these things as a group, and we figure out how we educate those around us. To Darlene's point, we need to make sure that our students that are registering in high school are not just registered, but they're educated. We need to make sure that these college students that are displaced from their college homes have the information they need to be counted. We need to make sure that we are providing a landscape for these affinity groups. We need to make sure that our Latino students are being taken care of. We need to make sure that Black male educators have a voice, that higher ed educators have a voice, that rural educators have a voice. And that's a voice that's also silenced tremendously. And their money is being taken away, just like it is from those of us who work in the larger ISDs. So we need to make sure that we are just connecting on a deeper level. I don't care if you're at church. I don't care if you are in the grocery store. I don't care if you are at the hair salon or the nail salon. Talk to the people in your group. A lot of people don't know what Betsy DeVos is doing. And to that point, a lot of people will choose Vice President Biden and Senator Harris over Trump if they knew how bad the educational system was. Some people are not even looking at the president. They're looking at the entities beyond the president. And we need to make sure that we are driving the point home that Betsy DeVos has to go. To Aisha's favorite hashtag, bye bye Betsy. And we truly believe in that when we are talking on our meetings. That is our go-to hashtag. We have to get her out. She's hurting everyone across the country. And like I said before, our students deserve the chance to impact this global economy, because they have the wherewithal, they have the knowledge, they have everything they need as far as skills to get there. If we can make sure that the money is being funneled in the correct way, to Yuri's point, making sure that we are addressing the needs of students at impoverished campuses, students at low performing campuses, so we can address those needs before those campuses even become low performing. But as long as money continues to leave our hands are tied, and we're working with the little that we have to try to make the biggest impact.
Awesome. Sure, well stated. And this is a dynamic group, and what you guys have done tonight is really shined a light on a lot of people who are not aware. Like I said, myself, I'm speaking for the non-educator. I did not know some of the hurdles you guys were up against and some of the things you guys were faced and forced with to improvise to survive, and what we call this thing, I call it madness, but we can get through it if we all come together. And one thing we have to do is support one another. So at this time, I'll ask you guys any final thoughts from anyone, if anything that we did not discuss that you'd like the people to know.
The last thing that I would want to say is just the reason that it's so important that we get her off and away from our education system is because we desperately need someone who has been an educator. Because only being an educator will you truly understand what it's like to be in the classroom. And until we have someone in sitting in that title that understands the classroom, until then will our students be fully served. So amen to the bye bye Betsy.
One of the things that I want to make sure that we're thinking about is all of these priorities that we're currently sharing with Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris, when there is the new Secretary of Education is selected, we want to continue to let our voices be heard with these priorities, and so that they can eventually be turned into actual education policy. So don't just listen to us, when you're running and during a campaign, but continue to, we want to continue to have your ear once you are in office and say, okay, now we've mobilized and galvanized our efforts to get you in office. All the things that we shared with you, we want to see how that is materializing, and we still want to be the go-to. And I would say, and Sharifa, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but out of all the states that have educators for Biden, we have been the loudest and just been the example of what we should do. So they need to listen to Texas teachers. They need to listen to us.
You are not. You are right. Go ahead, Selena.
I just was going to add to Corey, as you continue with podcasts, and thank you for having me as a guest, that we spread the word and we share in conversation with people that just aren't quite sure. But how critical this is that when we don't put in and invest in our kids, which our kids are the future, which is tied to the legacy of this country. So that's what's at stake. And so much has in the past 4 years been taken away that we're limited and we're straining budget-wise to make things meet, especially in the vulnerable areas where funding is needed the most. So when talking about who do we vote for, I'm not going to vote, it's critical that we get out and vote. We need everyone to get out and vote, because when you look at that little boy, that little girl, blue, black, yellow, whatever color, that is the future. And the vote is an investment in their future. And they're the ones that's going to be taking care of us. So we have got to fight to the end with a vote for change on behalf of this country, on behalf of the legacy of this country that lies with the future of these children. And how do we put the investment in the future? Is through education.
I would add that, first, I really appreciate the opportunity to join the panel tonight. And then, I think it's important for folks to understand that the policy decisions of Betsy DeVos are putting educators in impossible positions across the nation. It doesn't matter if you're in a blue state, a red state. Her decisions are taking funds from schools, putting educators like myself back into classrooms when it may not be safe. We've been back in the classroom for 3 days now, face-to-face instruction. And it's just devastating what it does to our public schools, and in turn, that damage to our communities when we don't have somebody who has our backs as the highest education position in the nation. And so we need an educator to replace Betsy DeVos.
Well, I thank each and every one of you for just taking out the time. I know we had a few other guests on the panel that had to step off, and because you guys are fairly busy, but this is just to show you out there that, everyone that uses the excuse that they don't have a reason to vote, this is another layer. This is another reason. This is another area of importance of why you should get out and vote. If it's not for anything else, for your future. Sometimes we like to see tangible things, immediate change, and sometimes that doesn't happen because, there's an everlasting effect. And 4 years of what she has put in place, just imagine 4 more years. That'll be a very damaging process. Reconstruction phase was 10 years in history of America. So give it 8. and you'll see what the person would have to come in after and try to rectify. So if we can go ahead and get them out, so they can go ahead and start reversing some of these things and start actually getting people in that know, as we know with this actual president, he places donors in places without the experience, and he puts them in place based on their donation to his campaign. And Betsy was one of those people. She had a desire for school choice, private school, and what she did is he appointed her to this position not knowing anything, possibly anything about education, because she herself was not a part of the public education system. She was one of those who had private schooling, and she put her kids through private school. And so now that's all she knows. And so it's starting to rectify in the change, and what she's doing for our teachers is damaging for them. So again, I thank you guys for joining us. I thank you guys for being with us. We will send out information on the website of how you can get in touch with any of these individuals to talk more about it. It's very important that you engage in the conversation. Grassroots policy change is important. If you don't know some of the changes or some of the things that are affecting them, these people, they're out here, not just on this panel, but there are people out here that really knows what they're dealing with day to day, trying to educate our students. And to hear that they're back in class face to face when we don't have a cure for corona at this time. And some of us are still working from home. We're privileged and we're blessed to still have that opportunity, and our educators are not. They're always looked at as, like I said, a saving grace. They're the last to be considered for pay raises. They're the last to be considered for other opportunities for elevation, but they're the first to be considered like they're the front line when we're going to war with this thing. And I think it's devastating. I do believe that it's not fair. And I do believe that there's change that should happen, because just like us, this should not be even the thought of for them to have to face the world, especially with some of these teachers who have probably spouses who have underlying health issues that they have to go home to, and dealing with kids in a population where they are, possible contact. A lot of kids are asymptomatic. And so these teachers are putting their lives on the line just to prove a point. So again, like I say, if you don't think it's important to vote, this topic alone should spearhead you to go out and do what you need to do. So thank you guys again, and thank you for joining us. Until next time.
Thank you, Corey. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you for having me.